Over the years, the role of publication and medical communication professionals has expanded well beyond getting research published in peer-reviewed journals. Today, we're creating all kinds of resources designed to help healthcare professionals understand and apply the latest evidence. But are we creating the resources that field medical teams actually need? This is In Plain Sight, a podcast exploring the biggest questions and trends facing medical publication and communication professionals. I'm your host, Rob Mathias, President and CEO of ISMAP. Today, we're joined by Sarah Snyder, co-CEO of MSL Mastery. Together, we'll explore what field medical teams really need from publication professionals, how today's MSL role is evolving, and what makes a resource practical, accessible, and valuable in the limited time they have with healthcare professionals. I'm really excited to have you on the show today because I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the heart of what actual tools are being used in the field. Because we dream up lots of stuff and we think that you need all these things out there in the field medical community, but maybe you don't. So maybe we'll just start by level setting. It would be helpful during this conversation for you to highlight those areas or the characteristics of the field medical role so our audience has a better sense, like what's it like?
I love that question because your job is so difficult because the field role is so different from role to role. So if you think of a large pharma company, the role is pretty much going to be a little bit more consistent. You're going to be going out and seeing HCPs, sometimes community HCPs, sometimes academic KOLs, but you're typically going to have a 15-minute meeting with those individuals. The important part of what I just said is the 15-minute. That's the average time that a field medical person is getting with their audience of HCPs right now, whether it's an individual or even a group setting. So just keep that in mind too. We used to have the luxury of 45-minute meetings, but that's just gotten crunched down. And then I also want to emphasize that if we look at the smaller companies or even the mid-size, it's a little bit more varied. The field medical professional might be traveling and seeing advocacy professionals and managed care professionals and HCPs and doing a whole host of things in addition to clinical trial sites. They're wearing a lot of hats. And sometimes that means that if there's so many resources that they don't know where to go to get to what. If you put yourself in somebody out in the field's shoes, they're doing something a little bit each day differently. And they're not as home office based. So they're not using these all the time. So that mind switching of going back and forth and the knowing where to find what isn't as obvious as you would think when you're creating the tool, the various things that you're doing and how easy it is to forget the resources that you have. It's a very diverse role and always changing.
It sounds that way. And wow, 15 minutes, that is not a lot of time.
No.
So, let's say you take a brand new publication just comes out. It's hot off the press and you're about to go visit with a healthcare practitioner. What do you want to take in that office with you for that 15 minutes?
So it used to be that you would definitely want to take a slide deck with, 6, 7 slides that you could go over that publication with that provider. I think that number has dropped in half as far as less slides, less talking, and more listening to them to get the insights back. Insights is a buzzword right now in industry, but it's a buzzword for a reason because it's so important for field medical to show their value. And the number one currency for field medical is insights bringing back in. So when you think about the resources that you're creating, we really want to have resources available that generates questions and feedback from our HCPs or KOLs. So not just sharing the data, but actually making them start to think about the data and how they might change the behavior. What more might they want to see? My biggest thing right now is just the more that the resources can help solve the HCP and KOLs problems and help the field medical people talk about the problems as well. I think that's really important. Not just the data or the statistics, but like how do they fit into their practice? Where would they use it? All the actionable things, that's what people want right now. They can go read that publication, Rob, or just skim it, right? So they want to know, what do I do with this?
I think there's probably an assumption that the data that we're bringing to them is just as important to them as it is to us. And maybe in their world, the problems that they are trying to solve are very different. So I guess having a better understanding and those insights that you refer to really help us to all understand better what's keeping your physician up at night, for example.
I love that. And also just the diversity of the audience too. So the resources, you guys have a very difficult job because the resources also have to be able to be used with various audiences. So sometimes that might mean a group presentation where you've got a mixed audience. And sometimes that just might mean an MSL has to use that same slide set for an academic and a community. So they have to be able to be nimble. And a lot of that is on the shoulders of the MSL to be able to take a slide deck and work with it, but just also thinking about that with the creation of the materials.
Gotcha. Interesting. Would you say that the slide deck is still the primary currency?
Oh,
that you're using?
100%. Yeah, it
Okay.
is right now. I mean, whether or not it should be, I guess we could debate, but it definitely, most MSLs really prefer to present from slides.
Okay. I asked that question because I know that there's so many different types of resources that we pull together, different types of tools and things that we as medical communication professionals get excited about. A tailored video, or it could be a talking head, or it could be any one of these new technologically advanced types of things that we think are going to be better communication tools. Are they not as useful?
I think they're not as useful yet because MSLs aren't trained on how to appropriately take those in. It's the model has always been go in, have the conversation, use the slide deck. So it's familiarity, and that's just what we've always done. Doesn't mean that it's right, but I have yet to hear from an MSL that they're really using those others as much as they probably should be. And I think the reason is they're just not sure how to incorporate it into a conversation. Especially, it might be awkward if you only have 15 minutes to say, like, I'm going to play this video for you. The MSL's worried that that's going to steal time away from their meeting time.
Interesting. Okay. So if we shift a little bit now to artificial intelligence, you've probably heard of that, I'm sure, AI, and utilization across medical affairs, but in particular, we're talking today about medical communications and our field medical colleagues. Where does AI fit into all this for this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the discussion, right? Because that 15 minutes is going to continue to go down if we don't provide additional value above and beyond what AI can provide. Open evidence is, just continues to skyrocket. ChatGPT just rolled out something for physicians. So they're going to go there unless we can provide something. And that's where that more actionable, what are we going to do with the data? How can we bring this HCP in and really build a relationship and have that human element? So in the material creation, thinking about that too, the conversation has to be fostered.
So what I hear you saying is that now in the age of AI, some of the resources that maybe you might bring out to a healthcare practitioner, they already either have it, they found the answers to some of their problems because they're using large language models. We really need to shift back to what are the problems they still have, which gets back to our earlier conversation as to what's really happening for them at point of care.
Yes. And I think that with AI, content creation is easy, right? So there's more content. So people just have a little bit of content fatigue. More isn't better. How can the content really be tailored and easy to use and meaningful? It used to be, we love to have a lot of different slide decks and things like that. And now it's almost like, gosh, less is more, right? How can we use the resource and have it be really, really good, but foster the communication?
No, that makes total sense. And, I think we're really talking about entering an era of customization, tailoring, really thinking about that end user and their particular needs. Not that we haven't been doing that for years, but I think AI really allows us to speed up that process. So when you consider AI and some of your field medical colleagues, how are you seeing it used for content development?
So it depends. I mean, a lot of companies are limited on what they can do in these models unless they have an internal one that's approved. So I would say I'm not seeing as much content generation from individual companies as you would think. It's lagging behind other industries, right? But it's coming. And also, the ability to take a journal article and make it into a podcast and things like that is stuff that field medical is using for their own training. They're using it for internal training. So people are getting more comfortable with those types of content generation.
Okay. Okay. So do you see future opportunities for like publication teams and field medical teams to work together on some of these issues?
I think there's never been more opportunity for the two to be collaborative. I mean, the good thing is it's easier to communicate now than ever before, too. So some of these systems are allowing MSLs to get their insights faster, and then those can go to the publication teams too, right? So that they can actually hear, how is this stuff being used? What do you need? And then go out there. And then I think in an ideal world, better training from the pubs teams. Hey, we created this resource. Here's how to use it. AI will hopefully free up some time so that bi-directional exchange can happen.
Yeah, and this seems to be very thematic of a number of things that we've talked about during the course of this conversation is, almost this assumption that we have on the medical communication side that you know those materials are there, you know how to use them. Let's touch on the training piece a little bit more. What type of training do you think MedCom professionals can do with their field medical teams to help them be better prepared?
Well, 100% any training is better than no training. So, I mean, ideally speaking, they'll get to practice with their resources. So the training is a little bit more interactive and ask questions about it too. The biggest thing, Rob, that we see is that when a piece comes out, so let's say MedComs creates that slide deck or creates whatever it is, the video, the field team, you might think automatically knows the why. But that doesn't usually happen. They don't know the why behind the resource creation and why they would use that particular one, who would be the right person to use it with. So that would be where the training would have to start. And then the rest of the training would be, okay, now you know the why, and then let's get into the how, the actual tactical use of this, and go step by step. And that how is so important, because consistency has been lacking in field medical. And consistency doesn't mean that it's scripted, but it just means that people are using it in the same way to make sure that the information put out there is consistent. We can't really make fun of AI's hallucinations if we're no better as field medical teams.
We talked a little bit about earlier about, you mentioned open evidence. So we talk a lot about that in the publications MedCom space because listen, at the end of the day, we're working so hard to get a publication in a peer-reviewed journal only to find that it's being summarized at point of care through these tools. And not to say that it's a bad thing, but it does make me wonder what role that plays or how that changes things for a field medical representative who's out there. And instead of having that 15 minutes to produce that data, they're watching the physician just type stuff in and get summarizations on the fly. Like, what's different now?
Yeah, I think everything is different now. The role has completely shifted, and it was already shifting a little bit just because people can go to the internet. I mean, obviously, and faster, right? But now the role is no longer, hey, Rob, I have a question about your data. By the time you get in there for the meeting, they'll have already gotten that answer to their question. So it has to be like, was the answer to your question what you expected? And how are you going to use that data? And that next level conversation has to happen. And you got to think, what can I add value on above and beyond open evidence? I think a lot of this keeps me up at night to think about, because there's people that say, oh, with AI, there won't be the need for MSLs anymore. And I don't believe that's the case, because I do think that the role of the MSL is to also ask better questions. And that we can do that better than an open evidence. One of the things to think about as you're creating materials is that the initial question is rarely the question, right? So it's one of those things where somebody might type something in open evidence and get an answer back, but was that really the root cause of what they wanted to know? So if we can go a level deeper and really understand the customer, open evidence might not ever really truly understand the HCP or KOL because they're trying to cover everything. And that's the advantage, I think, that the niche therapeutic area MSL and corresponding medcoms would have, just a better understanding the customer.
Well, I really like that, because I sit and I try to contemplate how things like open evidence are going to change the playing field for all the medical affairs functions. And in particular, obviously focus on publications, medical communications. But truly, at the end of the day, there's probably some opportunity to partner on better tailoring and trying to think about the specificity that a physician can't get at point of care when they're using open evidence. How to better train them to use these tools perhaps is also another avenue that could be helpful. Instead of trying to fight against it, maybe work with it in some ways.
Oh, I love that too, because I think it goes back to okay, when do you use what? And open evidence is fine for maybe a basic thing, but we know that it doesn't include all the journals. It doesn't include all, any information from pharma right now. I love what you said, because I think if we go in the mentality that I've heard some individuals say that we need to kind of like lower them down and scare tactics about it, we're not going to stop the use. So it's more so, hey, when is the right time to contact your MSL? When is the right time to you need a fast answer? Go for it.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, right? And we talk a lot about like trying to relearn and re-own the infrastructure by which data gets out there. And, if we run across all of the medical affairs functions, run away from AI, run away from the fact that it's being utilized and try to say, no, it's bad, or scare tactics, like you mentioned, it's going to make us worse off in the end, because it's definitely going to be used either way. So in the context of, we've talked about a whole bunch of things, but in the context of bringing different resources to bear and in the context of AI, does metrics look different for field medical teams now? And how does that impact what we do when we partner with publication professionals?
Yeah, I think it's important on your end to know that, and not every MSL team has metrics, but the ones that do, the metrics are a lot higher than they used to be. And they're very high as far as in-person visits, which makes sense when you think what we're trying to compete against, right? With AI, that in-person feeling definitely will boost the value of an MSL. But metrics are probably at least 30% higher than they were even 5-6 years ago. So the demand to see more HCPs and more KOLs. And on that note, the question that you might have is, well, there's still the same pool of KOLs. How can the metrics be higher? Is it just more frequency? And it's not that. It's that it used to be a typical KOL panel. And by KOL panel, I mean an MSL is responsible in their geography to visit a certain number of people. That used to be 25, 30 people. It's anywhere from 60 to 100 at a lot of these companies now. So it's no longer just the top academic KOLs. It's now that MSLs are seeing a lot more of the community HCPs and also nurse practitioners, physician assistants as well.
That's interesting. We tend to forget about the fact that there's all these other stakeholders out there. And so, we traditionally for years, we've talked about reaching the physician at point of care in practice. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that care delivery continuum is much broader these days. Is there something that we should know on the publications, medical communications end about that shift, that phenomena?
Yeah, because when you think about that same slide deck or that same resource needing to be used for a community versus an academic, I think that's where you could put yourself in the MSL shoes. And it's not always that they need a separate one, because then again, it's just almost too much. But how can they have the ability to tailor what they say, their talk track, and use the same resource? It's a tough thing.
Yeah, I guess we're talking about ultra tailoring now, because you're thinking about tailoring for all kinds of different subsets. And so it really becomes, but I guess that's where that AI component comes in as well, again, because we have the resources to be able to do that moving forward. Interesting.
True. Mm-hmm.
So if we hone in just a little bit more on, the current and the evolving relationship between medical affairs teams, but in particular publication medcoms and field medical, are there things that you would have loved to have said to your publication medcom professional colleague, but haven't said or want them to know?
Yeah. So I would want to see the biggest thing for MSLs right now isn't necessarily just the publication coming out, but it's the subsequent sharing. So, they all have different tactics as far as, and I don't know the wording as well as you would, but the ability to share on X, or the infographics that they require, or the patient specific things that they have in the publication. And that's a lot of times what the MSL will see is comments on X about the article or about something from it. So how is that being taken into account too? Because a lot of field medical right now is wrestling with. How much do I get involved with these digital opinion leaders? And that's not, I know that's not the scope of this conversation, but I think those are the things too, that is publications taking that into account. If I got to spend a day with the publications team, those are the kind of things I would want to know more about. How are we evolving?
Yeah, well, it's interesting too that you brought up digital opinion leaders, because it's kind of an interesting question for all of us to grapple with, right? It's a sufficient distraction to, evidence being delivered in a good way, in a solid way. And then it gets me into thinking, well, who actually owns that? Is that the field medical team trying to, have some defensive strategy? Is that one of the publication or medcom teams trying to gather those insights and put them together? Do we just ignore them and run away? So it's kind of a,
right?
A tough scenario.
It's really tough. I did a poll on that on LinkedIn probably 18 months ago. It'd be fun to see the results now, but it was who owns that: marketing, medical, and most people still felt like marketing owned that. But I think that the problem is, if someone's out there commenting on your publication and it ends up being a negative thing, is that marketing, or is it something where, we should have had at least some type of visit and it was the field medical that dropped the ball there? It's a conversation.
It sure is.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered a lot of interesting ground here. If I had to ask you, as we start to wrap it up, are there some key takeaways that you might have for our publication medcom folks? I'd asked you before about what you'd want to say to them, but is there something with regard to how the fields are evolving that you'd want our listeners to know about?
Yeah, I would say number one would be the shorter visit time. So just thinking about that with resource creation, I think maximizing time with resources that really matter. I mean, I understand the importance of having the overview and things like that. And we have to have compliance slides, but being able to jump in quicker, I think, is really important right now. And then number two would be the bigger scope of a panel of HCPs that field medical is responsible for. So a lot broader of individuals. And I think we covered that. And then the third thing would be, with AI, not just information dissemination, but more about what the information means. And so if, the creative minds behind publications and medcoms can ponder that, how can we take this to the next level so it is better reflective of what the data means? That's what we've got to be able to do.
Yeah, and I love that term, resources that matter. I think that's really, really important, because there's all kinds of things that we can produce. There's all kinds of tools and things that we can have, but really trying to hone in. I think the thesis of this whole podcast has really been to, I always use the word double click, but to double click on what actually works, what matters, and to take a page from your comments earlier, insights. All that really comes down to knowing what's going on in reality, and then trying to solve those problems through tailoring, which I think is a maybe even a more difficult way to go about this than just producing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I remember talking to an MSO about 2 months ago, and he was really frustrated because his company was requiring him to use specific slide decks or even specific slides. And, one of the things is, if it's not working, let's pivot a little bit too, right? So really listening to the MSLs, hey, this resource is landing. It seems like the physicians are really, they like this one versus, and this isn't really MedCom's responsibility, but it is something to think about when these are disseminated. Sometimes MSLs are required to use certain things. And so feedback from them on the what's working is really valuable.
That's all for today. Thank you all for listening. Please take a minute to subscribe to In Plain Sight on your favorite podcast app. Share with your colleagues and rate our show highly if you liked what you heard today. In Plain Sight is a production of ISMAP, the International Society for Medical Publication Professionals. Our production partner is Citizen Racecar. Our producer and editor is Hajar Eldas. Post-production by Alex Brower. Publication and promotion by Candice Chantalou. To join ISMAP today, go to ismap.org. Becoming a member means you can participate in value-packed webinars and receive instant access to exclusive tools and resources. If you're interested, just go to ismap.org, that's ismpp.org, to learn more.